Welcome to the Community Championship podcast, hosted by me, Matthew Williams, Tournament Director for the Community Championship. Today I'm joined by Matthew Favier, experienced leader in the sports industry, current CEO of Saudi Olympic Training Centre, over 10 years of high-performance sport as the Director of Australian Institute of Sport and the Head of Performance for UK Sport England. So good afternoon, Matthew. Let's dive straight in then. Is confidence contagious?
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for inviting me on to your show. Look, I think confidence is contagious, and I suppose I say that because as we move through our journeys in life, I think we meet people along the way, and I suspect, or I certainly feel that we're drawn to people who display confidence, and I think we take strength from other people who display confidence, sometimes when we're at moments of self-doubt, I guess, along different points in our day or our week or our life. So whether it's truly contagious, but I certainly think it's an attractive quality that people have. And I think there is a difference between confidence and arrogance, which is a fine line as well. But for me, I think there is certainly something about confident people that we can all learn something from.
Could you elaborate on that fine line between the confidence and arrogance, and why you think maybe it could be negative to be in one area versus the other?
Well, I think as somebody who has had feedback from time to time that suggests perhaps I can step over that line, and maybe for some people, and I don't consider myself to be an arrogant person, but I do think that there are certainly occasions where, maybe I've approached something in a particular way, the language I've used, my body language, and so there are many things I think that come with that. But for me, confidence is a way that you feel about yourself and the level of knowledge you have about something. And let me just talk about that a little bit. I think if it comes to, and let me use a sporting analogy, there are certain levels of confidence that comes with preparing well, knowing that you've done the work, knowing that you've thought about the detail in advance of performing. And that's whether that's in sport, an important meeting, a major presentation, something that's significant, irrespective of what that is. Confidence often comes with the quality of your preparation. And so that certainly is the case in sport. I think that's a really great analogy. Arrogance, I think, is a combination of maybe a little bit of overconfidence, but also a lack of self-awareness. And I think self-awareness is something that, for me, I would say could tip somebody into that space of being arrogant, where they lack a combination of compassion, understanding, appreciation for the people around them, not considering the way they speak about certain things, the language they use, and simply being completely lacking any thought or consideration for other people. So I think that's where I would perhaps, maybe not elegantly, but describe the difference between confidence and arrogance.
No, that's really interesting. And there's a lot of things that relate to what you said there could possibly also be turned the camera around and pointed towards me at times as well. And I think it's a hard balance, isn't it, to be somebody when you've prepared and you feel confident that it doesn't float into arrogance. So look, I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes, especially with your huge depth of knowledge around high performance sport. So, and I suppose also the models of best practice that you've used and adapted across the world, really, that is something that's quite rare, really, to see things working all over and wondering what those traits are. But before we kind of dive to that, how did you end up in Saudi?
Yeah, great question. And I've for a long time worked in Australia, in the UK, in high performance sport. Both of those environments and ecosystems are very, very established, well developed, highly sophisticated now. And that's taken many, many years to get to that point. And along the way, there have been some great things done and certain decisions that have been made. And I think each of those countries and each of those elite high performance systems continue to iterate and to really look at the really getting into those marginal gains areas now. We're talking extreme levels of sophistication with regards to driving and striving to achieve gold medal performance, which, often people speak about. It's in the margins, it's in the hundredths and thousandths of a second, depending on the sport. So it's those really fine lines, and that's definitely where the UK and Australia are. I was I had 10 years in the UK, working for British Athletics for 6 of those 10 years, and then the last 3.5 working with UK sport leading into the London Olympic Games. And I was then recruited to go back to Australia to lead the Australian high performance system, which was experiencing a year-on-year decline from the Sydney Olympic Games and then the Athens Olympic Games. And there were some experiences that I had in the UK that were really interesting and transferable back to Australia. So I was able to put quite a few of those processes in place, and really the big turnaround for Australia took place, just prior to Rio. But the really strong results were really not realised until Tokyo, where Australia finished sixth on the medal table, having finished 10th and 10th in London and then Rio successively. So whilst I was not a director of the AIS at the time leading into to Tokyo, that many of the frameworks, systems and the changes that were implemented really flowed through. And it takes more than one cycle normally for that to occur. My wife is British, and 2 of our 3 children were born in the UK. And we had long spoken about moving back towards the Northern Hemisphere, particularly towards the UK. And this is the second time I had an approach to come and work in Saudi Arabia, specifically in high performance, and the timing was perfect. So we completed the Olympic cycle. Hockey, where I was CEO, won the silver medal in the men's program. I felt very satisfied with the work that I'd done there. We set up a new national league in hockey in Australia and really got the sport back onto television, which it hadn't been on for 15 or 20 years. So we really turned the sport around in many respects. And so it was a great opportunity. So this timing worked out perfectly. Whilst my family aren't with me, they're in the UK, and I commute. And my children have settled in extremely well, and my wife's extremely happy. And I'm finding a great lease of life in an extremely new environment with some, very interesting challenges around moving the sport system collectively, but in particular the high performance sport moving forward. And for me, the challenge here is very different. It's really around first principles, establishing a framework for future success for Saudi Arabian high performance sport. And by that, I mean sports that are competitive at the Olympic Games, Asian Games, and a range of world championships that are important to Saudi Arabia.
Can I just dive back into something you said there within the Australian system, that there was a decline after what was a home games? Just to kind of dive into that in a little bit more detail, what was the framework that would maybe possibly gone wrong? We see this with across loads of sports, maybe winning World Cups with rugby, for argument's sake, being English in 2003, and then a massive decline in performance. What's within your role, is it a sustainability? Do you see these peaks and troughs? Just kind of I suppose explain to people why sport might fall off, why your role is to maybe not create that fall off, and how that works.
Yeah, look, I think every circumstance and every country's context is a little bit different. Part of it's related to funding. Part of it is related to this. When you have a significant milestone event like an Olympic Games in your home country, the ambition and the attitude from the athlete community and the sporting group community, the anticipation of performing on your home soil, that is extremely unique. You rarely do athletes get the chance to do that. And when that comes about, those ambitions really begin very early in a young athlete's life. So, and certainly so, for example, if we're thinking, and I'm thinking at the moment as an Australian of 2032, for athletes now with 10 years to go to the 2032 Olympic Games, there is a group of Australian athletes who are somewhere between maybe 12 and 18 who probably now are starting to think about, in particular, really focusing their efforts on Olympic Games. The same could be said for London. So I was coaching a group of sprint athletes in the UK at the time. And I had a kid who won the World Junior 100 metres in 2006. He subsequently didn't get selected for the London Olympic Games. He did go to Rio as a member of the relay team. But when I still remember where I was when the Olympics were announced, and it was a massive, massive event. I remember where I was when Sydney was announced, and I remember where I was when London was announced. So the combination of things create that huge ambition for young aspiring athletes. So that's one part. in the Australian context, the system really hadn't changed for probably 20 years. And I was an athlete at the AIS. I was a scholarship holder. I was a aspiring 800-meter runner. I finished third in the Olympic trials in '88. Having said that, I was over a second outside, so that's just less than 10 meters over 2 laps to qualify for an Olympic Games. So I was close, but not quite there. But the system really had not really evolved for a long period of time, while at the same time, many other nations, the UK in particular, Japan as well, all had really invested more than they had ever done. They were much more strategic than they'd ever been before. And the combination of no real change to the Australian model and significant change to other competitor nations, coupled with investment, coupled with opportunity, like hosting an Olympic Games. Japan did extremely well in 2021. Brazil did well in 2016. London did well in both Beijing and London itself. So you bring all of those factors together, the decline in Australia really dropped off after Athens. They had a bit of bounce from Sydney to Athens. In fact, they got more gold medals. But then because there was no change really around the system and there's a bit more detail, I think that was among the reasons as to why the level of performance measured by medals declined over that period of time. And I think we see that in business. If you think about businesses, business has to always continue to be diligent around its operating model or its marketing strategy or its way of doing business, because the competitors look at other. There's other technology, or there are other factors, there are other flavors or tastes that become relevant and can sometimes take market share away. I mean, there are some. I think BlackBerry was recently announced as is no longer, right? And who would have ever thought at the time when BlackBerries were around, and Nokia, So there are some well described examples, but I think evolution is really important as well.
So then we look at the resurgence of those programs, right? And then the success models. And then we see how you've done that not only in Australia, but then through the UK sports system. And hopefully we'll bring that into Saudi and into the kingdom. So when we're looking at best practice models, are there any kind of key fundamentals that you've seen across this time that you would say, right, actually to build any operation in elite sport or business, it needs to be built on these pillars?
Well, I think it's not a first order thing, but I think you have to really be clear about ambition. You have to have a really stated, clearly identified aspiration. Now that may or may not be, we want to be top 5 or we want X number of medals, but the ambition to improve is what I'm mainly talking about. The objective to say that we really are here to improve. And somewhere along the way, you'll define what success looks like. So you need to get to that level of precision. So for me, having ambition, true ambition, not just something I say, but something I feel and are committed to. And that includes making decisions around investment, because these types of systems cost money to run. And they cost money because, to get to the next point, there are great athletes in just about every playground around the world. There'll be great athletes running around somewhere. You need to match those great physical talents and athletes with capability with opportunity. You need to provide pathways for them to follow, a roadmap, if you like. Usually that has to be done by somebody else, not by the athlete. So there needs to clearly be great coaches, because coaching is fundamental, and we know technical, tactical development requires guidance. Coaches are clearly a big part of that. And then we get into the areas of performance support. So that's when we're starting to get more and more sophisticated. But it's at its very first, in the very first principles, if you like, of providing those opportunities is really from a national perspective, is having ambition. And so the sort of stuff that I'm working with is at a system level. So the sort of system sort of things requires direction from above, the Ministry of Sport, for example, the government, to make these levels of investment, and they consider it to be important. And they consider it to be important, which is evidenced by making a deliberate investment into that area. And so that's happening in Saudi at the moment. And I'm super excited about what I'm here to try and do, and try and accelerate, if you like, that life cycle to get sport, elite sport, into a new place, a more exciting place, a place where Saudi community can be super proud of their athletes beyond football.
And looking at the Saudi athlete now as a generalization with your experience, obviously, yet again, as we say, from many forms of around the world, is what are you seeing? And this will be obviously interesting to our listeners. What do you see in Saudi? Is there set sports that you think work really well here? Is there culture that adds value to certain sports choices? Are there any of the new sports coming into the Olympics that actually we feel would benefit Saudis and people here? Just kind of give us a little bit
Hmm.
more on that.
Yeah, great question. I think it was certainly from a Saudi perspective, or any nation, you need to have a level of cultural awareness. And I think for Australia, let me start with Australia, just to give the example. Team sports are incredibly strong for Australia. Just for a relatively modest population, we typically send away a number of team sports. Australia won the first medal in Olympic Games in men's basketball, having had a few attempts where they finished fourth. Hockey's been a regular medal and podium sport. So I use that as an example where, for Australia, team sports are an important part of the mix, even though there is only one medal, and it's usually quite expensive to pursue because you have to have many more athletes to pursue a single medal. In the UK, it's track and field is a big sport and very important sport to the UK. Um, Again, by way of example, and so for British people, track and field and rowing again is a really strong sport, and other sports are. Now they're just really small micro examples. In Saudi, um, there are some sports that are stronger for Saudi than others. Equestrian is a sport that has a real history here. The Saudi Arabia has got a really proud history with equestrian disciplines across the suite of disciplines that are offered. So that's certainly one that I think is culturally significant for Saudi. Then there are other sports where Saudi has got a really strong and appear to have a real capability to perform well on the world stage. Now, some of these are sports that are emerging as opposed to established, but some of the combat sports are really strong for Saudi Arabia. Certainly beyond the Olympic Games, we're thinking also of the Asian Games, and the Asian Games are a really important sport for Saudi Arabia within the Asian community, the second largest multi-sport event in the world. And so the project I'm leading is also supporting and has aspirations for the Asian Games. So I think any high-performance system needs to think about the events and the sports that are important for the community that it represents, because I can't simply translate either the Australian example or the UK examples and expect that they will resonate. They won't. They might, but they won't always necessarily. So just being sensible about understanding where those opportunities are, which I have to say I'm still really trying to get a really good handle on. So I don't profess at the moment to know all of that yet, but there are a couple of examples I would say that are important to Saudi. Bearing in mind, track and field is a really strong capability in track and field, and in fact, the first Olympic medal Saudi Arabia won was in the 400-meter hurdles in Sydney, actually. So there is some pedigree in track and field as well.
So let's take it all the way back, because we have a lot of people through our demographic that will be parents and young aspirational athletes. Obviously, you alluded to there being very, very close to qualifying for an Olympics in the 800 meters. What was your kind of journey from being, let's say, a young teenager or 8, 9-year-old boy to kind of that aspirational kind of development into elite sport, and what's that kind of taught you and then allowed you to push forward into where you are now?
Sure. I guess, look, I was a country kid, so I grew up in the northern part of Australia. So I was the oldest of 6 kids with parents who were primary school teachers, and I was always, as most country kids and still now, play a variety of sports. Rugby league was my first love, and then athletics probably a very close second. I broke a leg and an arm when I was a kid. My dad said, "That's enough. You're not doing any more rugby league." So I started to do running, and I thought I was the quickest kid in school. I wasn't quite, but I was close. And then I'd always wanted to go to run at the state championships at primary school, which I never ever did. So eventually, I found my way, won a primary school 800, and again, still never went to the state championships. But I eventually started to. I won. When I got to high school, I won the school 800, and then the coach came up and asked me if I wanted to do some training in preparation. I said, sure, that'd be great. I still have memories of watching the 1976 Olympic Games and Alberto Monterina, who won the 400 and 800. And so that really stuck with me for a long period of time. So I was a huge fan of what he did at the time. And the first year I had a go at running and training, I won a state championship. So that was a huge step and a huge reward for somebody who was, I think, 13 or 14 at the time. And then of course, I started to, let's say, take it a little bit more seriously. So I would play rugby league in some of the winter. Then I would train for 6 to 8 weeks. This was when I was allowed to still do that. And then I won. I think I successively won every state championship in Queensland, and then eventually went on to. I think I represented the state when I was 15 against 17 and 18-year-olds. I finished second at the national championships at quite a young age and broke at the time what was a national record. So ultimately, obviously, I thought, okay, I got great level of reinforcement through that, and then I got offered a scholarship to the Australian Institute of Sport when it was in its second year of opening, and at the same time had a scholarship to go to the US. And so I chose to stay in Australia, and as I say, I attempted to progress my career. I think, like a lot of athletes, I was good but not great. I had some injuries along the way as well. So a combination of things probably held me back a little bit. Sometimes the choices I'm sure I made along the way, but ultimately I came close but not quite. So that's stuck with me, I think, along my journey as well. And I think, if I had my time again, I'd probably do one or two things a little bit differently. But I've always been motivated about supporting athletes. I was a teacher for a little while. I've coached. And so I've always had in the back of my mind this coaching ethos, I suppose, with supporting others to improve, wanting to pass on some of the experiences that I've had along the way as well.
So if we dive back to that young early coach, obviously there was quite a lot of development in there. What were the kind of key ingredients that he made you maybe aware of, or technical or tactical around your running, that you can kind of remember that were just like, oh yeah, this is the difference why I've improved? Or was it just you were developing and just had a bit of guidance? What was the key
Well, I
bit
think
there?
at the time I had no idea what I was doing. So I learned a lot. But so when he would ask me to do certain running sessions, I had no idea what was good, what was not good. I had no one to compare it to. So I just went off and did it and didn't think much about it. I would just do the best I could, survive the session, turn up for the next one. As I got older, you start to really, compare your times and am I running fast enough? Am I recovering enough? But definitely at the time, I think an advantage was not having any of that information around me. So all I did was turn up and run and train and recover. No idea what others might have been doing. As it turned out, what I was doing was pretty good. And as I say, I think I was, in some races 30, 40, 50 meters ahead of people at a state championship. So that's quite a long way over 800, even at that level. So I was obviously, there was something that he was doing that I was responding to that worked well. What I thought he was very good at was running mechanics. So it's just I was a very fluent, efficient athlete. So I moved well. I was quite quick, relatively quick relative to others. So I had quite a good turn of speed or change of pace. So that became important. I probably wasn't the greatest longer distance runner, and that was probably my weakness. So I sometimes say I was a great 750 meter runner, not 800 meter runner. So I was I thought of myself as a 4.8 runner rather than an 8.15 type of athlete. So that was probably the gap, if you like, in my development that held me back. But so two things I would say. There were some technical things in the way I ran that was really important. I think a work ethic. So there was never something that he asked me to do that I wouldn't do. So if he asked me to do it, I trusted him to give me the right advice. So I never doubted what he would ask me to do. So that was really important. That coach-athlete relationship became significant. And I think the third thing that again comes back to that very first question around confidence is to an extent, even though at that young age, I didn't really know what my competitors were like. And I used to get incredibly nervous before a race. Um, when the gun went, I knew what I needed to do. So that confidence in knowing at least what I needed to do, and whether my good was good enough remained to be seen. But I would give my very best, and know that when I walked off the track, I would be, there's nothing more that I could have done. So the confidence to at least know that I would do that was probably among the three things that I would take away from that experience.
You said there that in the previous that you would make changes, and I always find this quite interesting. What do they say? The older you get, the better you think you were, kind of thing. This idea, and I could allude to that now with some of the technology that we see in sport on how we would have gone about training, especially being in a contact sport with the bone on bone stuff. Now would be very prevalent to understanding concussion. Somebody like Gabriel Selassie, I think, writes in his book and says that if he was to go back and train now, he would do a nowhere near the amount of miles that he did, and he would shorten his training because of the damage on his body. So obviously you've had this amazing opportunity to be working with top coaches, physios, everything that comes with elite performance. So if you would apply it now back on yourself when you were younger going through development, are there any real key standout things that you would do differently?
Yeah, look, probably from a training and preparation point of view, I would, the things that I think I mentioned, I saw myself as a 4.8 runner, not as an 8.15 runner. And that was a big mistake, because I felt I needed to train in a particular way. And the reality was that I had very good speed, or relative to the event that I needed to run. I didn't need to run 45 seconds for a 400, not that I could, but I didn't need to. And what I needed to have done was make sure that if you like, my capacity over the longer distance was stronger. So, for example, I never ran many or raced many 1500s at all. I had a real aversion to it, and I didn't feel it was didn't feel it was necessary until later in my career, when it was probably getting to a point where I was, at close to retirement. So, for me, if I had my time again, what I would have done is I would have trained differently, and I needed a different mindset, or what I needed was guidance at a different level from a coach that really resonated. And I had probably three coaches that were significant in my career, or four, sorry. But the last coach I had was probably the very best coach I could have worked with. And in retrospect, I had somebody who explained, who I listened to, who I understood, who I think really made the very best. Even though I didn't run my best time under them, I think I had the potential to have run my very best performance under their guidance. And so I think, again, if there's a significant point to this conversation, it's about, at an individual level, the person that you work with as a coach is really significant and so important to try and get right as early as possible, because they really are significant in guiding your career. And sometimes our careers, aren't very long as athletes, so you have a limited life cycle as an athlete, particularly as an elite athlete, where you're really running at the highest level. Might only be 4 to 5 years. It's rare that you might have 2 Olympic cycles. 3 might be super special. And certainly if you're medaling at that level, but just to be in that space, you don't have a huge amount of time. So, yeah, that's probably what I would do. I needed to change the way I approached my training, and that would have been influenced by the coach I was with.
So let's go to personal before we kind of wrap it up. So, like, obviously you're an elite sports performer, you're nearly an Olympian, you then work in sport. Like, what are your personal views on the importance of sport in the climate that we currently live in?
Yeah, I have a sort of an odd relationship with sport. As an athlete or as a former athlete, as a coach, I love it. I love what I really love about what I do is working with people. It's the creating opportunities for others to excel is the thing that I probably get most satisfaction out of. And I've probably been through my career where I've had those moments of recognition and acknowledgement for certain things that I've been able to achieve. Now, this is a very personal, if you like, challenge to try and establish something in a new environment. So for me, the personal satisfaction will be through the opportunity to establish a system that is sustainable, over time. So what I really have enjoyed is the personal side of the sport, and that's probably the thing that drives me most is really genuinely wanting to see others do well in the environment that I can influence, and being able to translate things that, in my experience, I know that will work. So I guess that's probably the thing that I think about the most when I'm in my role.
Having a look currently at the landscape of the 2030 vision, and obviously how this country has developed over the last 10 years, companies like Aramco developing and delivering huge community championship sports events, things like that. What does that do in your role when you have, companies and government and everyone trying to align to create a more active and focus on wellness and try and increase the, I suppose, demand? We've seen Formula One now in Aramco, and in Saudi, and we've seen also other big sporting events. And I believe that we are the host to the Asia Games in 2034. So how does this kind of go to help you deliver what you're trying to deliver?
Well, let me maybe consider this balance that we need to try and strike as a community between life and work. And I think that we often talk about work-life balance, whereas in my mind, it's a harmonization of both that I think is the current challenge for community, is to create environments where people can really maximize their benefit in to their family, to their community, but also make a contribution in a meaningful way, um, felt through work and what they do professionally. And so for me, organizations like Aramco that are putting this event on, I think are to be applauded. I think it reflects a real understanding around the value of creating community within the workplace. And I think we all want to be identified and attached to certain things. So we identify with, being a former athlete maybe, or being working in sport, or working in something, or we play a particular sport, or we follow something. So we have this identity that we each carry with us. So for me, sport and the lessons that sport can teach us, particularly as young people, things like, training, perseverance, discipline, following rules, listening, being coached, getting feedback, setbacks, achievements. These are all little life lessons that probably most people who play sport will and other things they might reflect on will say translate into other areas of life. And research certainly, and I can't and won't be able to quote it accurately, but there is strong research to suggest that people who played sport, including those particularly at a high level, make great employees because they have these experiences and they can really bring them into the workplace, to translate their energies and efforts from being a sports person into what they do in their professional lives. So for me, sport has a variety of roles to play. I think certainly Australia and the UK, where there's a really strong volunteer component to sport, it really creates community. Mums and dads helping out for the club football team, running the line, whatever it might be to run the club. These are really volunteer-based sort of things. So creating those environments, I think, where people can contribute, not for necessarily financial reward, but for other benefits, giving something back to the broader community, and creating those mechanisms where that can happen. I think are really important within the workplace. And I think, given the nature of particularly the Saudi environment that I'm beginning to learn about, where there's a huge expat community, it's culturally very different. It's probably even more important to create those community connections, and certainly where you bring those opportunities for expats and locals to come together and mix in a social setting. I think can only do good things for any company.
So I've got one more before the kind of crescendo, and I'm interested in this one because I always find it. I know how I'd answer it, so I always just guess how someone else would. But you've done so much, as we've already kind of been through, and it's been so enlightening. But if I can kind of tie you down to the top three, like what is Matt's top three like iconic moments in your life? If you were to say like these are them, what would they be?
Okay, so the first one was coaching a kid to win the world junior 100 meters. That was something that I had always wanted to do, was to coach. I wished I had more time, and I'll probably go back to coaching. I haven't had the time really to do it, but I developed a group of sprinters. So I was a kid that eventually, in my squad, won the European 100 in beyond my time, but I was really thrilled to have played a role in developing them. They ran under 10 seconds. This other athlete. So I was super proud of the group that I was working with. So coaching was probably one of the most rewarding things. Um, I think professionally, the changes I made at the Australian Institute of Sport, I think were really, really dramatic, and they, I think, have proven to be really great decisions. And so I'm really pleased about the work that I did there, although I wasn't in the role to see them realised in Tokyo, knowing that the frameworks that were set up have led to that level of performance. I think that's just been really satisfying personally for me to have done that. And I guess the role that I'm in now, in some ways, is in the top group, because it's so different to the work that I've done before, and it's got a variety of very, very different challenges. So it's testing me in ways that I probably wouldn't have otherwise experienced had I not been here. So I'm finding it extremely stimulating at this stage of my career.
So, last question. Okay. If you could pass on one of your worldly life lessons to improve someone else's life, what would it be?
Look, it's a little bit cliche, but for me, I would say really got to follow your passion. You have one shot at doing something, and I would say that really from an elite sport context, your body will only allow you to do sport for a period of time, and you really should, if you have an ambition at all. I would encourage anybody to pursue that, whether it's in sport, art, or otherwise anything. Please, I think the last thing I wanted to do was turn 40, and I'm well on the other side of 40, turn 40 and regret something. And so I've always felt that was an important to me, to make sure that I um, didn't have regrets. Although, yes, there were things I'd like to do differently, but I certainly wanted to make sure that I gave myself every chance to do something I was really passionate about. And so I've been able to do that and turn that passion into my career, which I'm doing now.
Matthew, thank you so much for your time today to go through that. I just think that the whole journey has been amazing. And I think that there are so many like golden pieces of information there for people to kind of take away and apply. And, for me, I think I probably could just agree with everything that you say, and especially that last bit there. I think, to go out and just give something a go, you never know where it goes. And we're both fortunate enough to work in a sporting environment where we're following an element of our passion, and it makes life a lot easier. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time
You're
today.
welcome, Matthew. Thanks very much.
And thank you for listening to this episode. The Community Championship is the biggest sporting event in Aramco history. The opening ceremony for the finals is happening in Central Camp on the 26th of March from 9 a.m, showcasing the finals of junior touch rugby and the 10K. With live music and entertainment, food stalls from around the world, and fun activities for children to get involved in. We look forward to seeing you. Keep listening for the next episode of the Community Championship podcast.